Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Mena Demise with the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation, and we welcome you back to our virtual Brain Trust series looking at critical policy issues, ways in which they affect the Black community in the era of COVID-19. For those of you who joined us when we started back in April, we've covered topics like the census and turnout for the Black community. We've looked at the stimulus package and the effects of recovery for the Black community. We've looked at the water workforce, and now we have an awesome panel of distinguished members of the Congressional Black Caucus, as well as leaders and experts in the tech sector to talk about the digital divide, but more importantly, the digital equity piece and how we bridge that gap. So before we get started, I want to give a special thanks to the Walton Family Foundation. The Walton Family Foundation has been a longtime supporter of the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. They sponsored our session on water 2 weeks ago, and they also are the sponsors of today's virtual Brain Trust. So without further ado, I want to make sure you all reach out to us either on Facebook Live. For those of you tuning in, you can use our hashtag at cbcfinc.org. Again, that's hashtag cbcfinc.org. Today, we are joined by the chair of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. We are joined by Congressman G.K. Butterfield, who has been a stalwart leader on bridging the tech divide as co-chair of CBC Tech 2020. And we also will be later joined by Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who has joined in her efforts with Congressman Butterfield to bridge the digital gap. We will also hear from Dr. Charles Cole III, founder and executive director of Energy Converters. We will hear from Felicia Hatcher, co-founder and executive director of Code Fever Black Tech. And we will also hear from Dr. Fallon Wilson, founder of the National Black Tech Ecosystem Builder Association. We will have a conversation where questions will be answered. So as you all know, you can reach out to us. We'll take your questions towards the end of today's discussion, but feel free to reach out to us on Facebook Live or our chat. So let us begin by introducing our fearless leader, Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, chairwoman of the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. She is serving her 14th term representing the congressional district in the great state of Texas. She's the first African-American woman to chair the House Committee on Science, Space, and Technology, and is the dean of the Texas Congressional Delegation, in addition to serving as the Dean of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona's Democratic Congressional Delegation. She is the highest ranking Texan on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee and the first nurse to be elected to the U.S. She has a reputation as a stateswoman who works with both parties to get things done, and she has been widely recognized as one of the most effective legislators in Congress, credited with authoring and co-authoring over 170 bills that were passed by the House and Senate and signed into law by the President. And so I want to turn it over to her for her remarks. Thank you, Chairwoman Eddie Bernice Johnson.
Well, thank you very much. And thank you for making sure that this program is really being produced. And I love joining this discussion today. I'd like to start by extending my sincere condolences to all the families who've had to deal with COVID-19. The devastation this virus has wrought across America in human and economic terms is immense, and we must come together to overcome this crisis. As efforts to prevent the spread of the crisis continue, many Americans are staying home, and for these households, the internet has become their primary connection to the outside world. So what we've been talking about all along, now we're experiencing even more vividly. Telework and remote education has enabled Americans to continue to work and learn during this crisis. People are turning to telehealth services to seek medical care, and families and friends are supporting one another using online meeting platforms such as Skype and Zoom. We're all able to safely convene for today's discussion because each of us has access to a reliable internet connection, and we are fortunate. According to a recent study by the Pew Research Center, nearly 30% of low-income adults don't have a smartphone. More than 40% don't have home broadband. And so that means we don't have access to a computer. While the so-called digital divide is economically understood to be an issue in rural communities, urban communities also face significant barriers to broadband access, primarily affordability and digital literacy. Communities of color tend to be disproportionately affected by these barriers. Here in Dallas, where I live and represent, about 42% of the households lack a fixed connection to the internet. As society has largely gone digital during the pandemic, disparities in access to broadband and digital services has really been amplified. So too have the consequences of this disparity. Many students at all levels are at significant risk of falling behind in their education. Many adults are missing employment opportunities and facing limited access to critical healthcare services. Communities across the country are scrambling to fill the gaps. In Dallas, school districts have partnered with civic and business leaders to distribute mobile hotspot devices and laptops to households in need, or driving close to a McDonald's because they can't get to libraries to try to get a signal. But these efforts are not a long-term solution. We must do more to expand broadband access, make it more affordable, and provide opportunities for digital literacy training. The Science, Space, and Technology Committee has taken this issue on really directly. We have not been unaware of this problem. We've had hearings to discuss the critical need for improved access to computing experience for students and the importance of digital literacy for skills development and career advancement. The Innovations in Mentoring, Training, and Apprenticeship Act was enacted in 2018 to direct the National Science Foundation to fund research on best practices for distant learning. The Rural STEM Education Act, which we passed out of committee last November, directs the National Institute of Standards and Technology, NIST, to establish a prize competition to stimulate the development of innovative technologies to deploy broadband. The bill also directs the Office of Science and Technology, or OSTP, to establish a broadband working group to improve access and adoption across the U.S. As chairwoman of the Science, Space, and Technology Committee, one of my top priorities is ensuring that we are investing in the development of a workforce that is equipped to meet the challenges today. I'm from an area that has the largest data center in the nation, and we are constantly looking for employees. As a senior member of the Transportation and Infrastructure Committee of the CBC, I'm also working closely with my colleagues on efforts outside the committee's jurisdiction to address the same areas. Without a strategic investment in expanding access and adoption of broadband, I fear that we will continue to fall short, particularly during this COVID-19 health crisis. The next round of emergency stimulus must include an infusion of funding for programs to meet the surge in demand for broadband and address long-standing disparities in both rural and urban communities. During this crisis and beyond, digital inclusion is a critical element of economic inclusion. People need fast and affordable internet access, along with basic computer skills to access remote health care, search for housing, apply for jobs, get homework done, run small businesses, review bank transactions, and perform other everyday tasks. As tragic as the COVID-19 crisis has been, it is an opportunity to drive home the need to finally address the digital inequities that have been ignored far too long and threaten to hold America back. I look forward to a fruitful discussion among today's esteemed panelists, and I thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Chairwoman. We appreciate your comments and your leadership. I understand that, by the way, to our audience, our members are doing all they can to represent our interests. They are actually in session currently voting. So Congressman Butterfield, I believe you also are headed to the floor. If you would like to join us a little bit later or now, we welcome what works for you.
I think I can do it now if you would indulge me. Let me first thank you for allowing me to come on and to say a few words. I may have to cut this short and head to the floor. We're voting on a bill that will change some of the restrictions on the PPP loans that you've heard so much about, and so I may have to dash to the floor. But thank you very much to the foundation and to you, Dr. Bernice, and to Congresswoman Bernice Johnson, who is just a great leader, not just in the Congressional Black Caucus, but in the Congress of the United States. Thank you, Congresswoman, for your remarks today, and thank you for all the work that you do. As many of you know, digital equity, specifically the expansion of broadband access to rural America and to communities of color, is an issue that I have been very actively engaged on for my 15 years since I've been in Congress. While COVID-19 pandemic has laid bare the many years of inequality in our healthcare system, it has also made very clear to us the absolute necessity for digital literacy and a consistent high-speed internet connection for participation in the modern world. However, across the country, millions of Americans still lack reliable access to the internet. The gap is particularly evident in rural communities such as where I'm from in North Carolina, in rural America, and many areas in my district where broadband infrastructure is sparse and sometimes completely unavailable. As we in Congress make efforts to understand and address the long-term consequences of COVID-19, it has become painfully clear just how harmful a lack of broadband connectivity is, especially for the country's most vulnerable populations. While we are all adjusting to our new circumstances in the wake of COVID-19, those who still lack broadband access are having a very difficult time, particularly with respect to education, employment, and healthcare. Stay-at-home mandates have forced millions of students out of the classroom. In response, school systems across the country are offering instruction by way of remote learning platforms. In North Carolina, my home state, over 1 million students must now find a way to access their lessons online, even if they do not have a fixed internet connection in their homes. Many of these students will lag behind because they lack access to the high-speed broadband necessary to conduct research and complete homework assignments. This homework gap, as we call it, is perhaps the cruelest aspect of what we call the digital divide. The longer these young people go without consistent access to the internet, the farther they will fall behind their fully connected peers. The virus's spread has also borne out just how critical broadband connectivity is to the viability of our nation's institutions of higher learning. This is especially true for our country's HBCUs, which were already facing years of underfunding and the unique challenges that come with delivering a high-quality education to communities that are historically underrepresented on college campuses. The implications of the COVID epidemic for those of our nation's workforce who lack access to a high-speed connection are similarly severe. Millions have lost their jobs. The unemployment rate came out this morning, the jobless numbers, and they're terrible. Millions have lost their jobs, and those fortunate enough to still be employed have now been forced to conduct their business remotely. However, working from home is often only possible with a broadband connection and in rural districts like mine. Many residents continue to make do with limited or inconsistent broadband access, putting their economic stability at a significant risk. And so I want to thank you for having this discussion today. I'm going to have to cut my remarks short. I'm told that I must go to the floor right now, but thank you so very much for joining this webinar today.
Thank you, Congressman Butterfield. We really appreciate your service and leadership We understand you have to go. I'm still going to tell our audience about you, but you can please take off, no problem. So for those who don't know, Congressman Butterfield, he has been, as I mentioned, really leading this diversity in tech initiative, closing the digital gap. He also has a background as a resident Superior Court judge way back in the late 80s. He currently serves on the Energy and Commerce Committee. He has been a champion of everything from affordable healthcare to education and investments in the rural community, as you heard him discuss. And he has been a past former chair of the Congressional Black Caucus. So we really appreciate his service and his remarks, and we'll return to those in the discussion as we see the questions coming in. I want to give pause if Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who is also on the floor, if she's here, we can tune in. If not, we will definitely return to her later. They are doing their due diligence representing our interests, and we appreciate them making time. She has also been a huge champion on these issues, so we will hear from her a little bit later. So let us turn now to our distinguished panelists here. We'll begin with Dr. Cole III. He is, as I mentioned, founder and executive director of Energy Converters. He's an educator focused on advancement of youth of color, but more specifically on Black males. The passion comes from his experiences growing up without proper support, including being homeless and attending more than 10 elementary schools across the country while his parents battled addiction and incarceration. Throughout that experience, no adult, no group, no organization ever asked him how he was achieving success, nor how he was surviving. Schools were not a place where students in similar predicaments were leaning. This experience helped lead to the publication of his first book, Beyond Grit and Resilience. As founder of Energy Converters, he served as he comes from a community that has shared many of the students' experiences that we just discussed. Previously, Charles served as a social worker, director for Teach for America, the vice chair of the California Young Democrats, Black Caucus, and at the director's level with various youth-focused nonprofits. He is a national speaker and writer. He can be found in Oakland and around the country working with youth on how to equip themselves appropriately to lay the groundwork for a bright future. He's currently the board member of UCSF's Benoff Children's Hospital and co-host of the 8 Black Hands podcast. His goals are about really empowering the community he grew up in, which includes Chicago. No stranger to that with his Chicago Bulls hat on, but his story is one that we all can connect to in many ways, and his story is also very inspiring at the same time. So let's hear it from one of our experts himself who can talk to us more about this issue. Dr. Cole.
So thank you for having me. Thank you to the Congress folks that just spoke before us. This is a blessing to even be in this room. And I just want to start off by even saying, even before COVID, our kids wasn't getting what they deserve, what we should be getting from education. And I think that we should be taking this opportunity, even in all how tragic it is, to bring together our best minds and build something new. It wasn't built by God, so it can be changed, and our kids deserve better. So I just wanted to start by saying that. And I also just wanted to say, I'm here for all these groups. I'm here for a whole bunch of people of color and all that good stuff. But today I'm talking about Black people, and I'm talking to Black people, and I'm gonna say Black people. I'm not watering that down, and I don't think you all should either. And these times call for us to be, honest and direct. I can't hear you, Dr. Minna. You are
Unmuted.
It's all good.
So Dr. Cole, talk to us a little bit about what you've learned through your own story and the communities that you've been empowering in terms of the digital divide. What should be top of mind for the Black community, especially at this moment in time?
I think one of the things that I learned is, I think more of a reiteration of what we already knew. In times of tragedy, a group that was already being misserved get even more misserved, right? Even when we talked about when COVID started, for a long time, people thought that Black folks couldn't get it. And then we disaggregated numbers and saw that we actually dying at the highest rate, and we represent such a small part of the population. So only thing that I learned is that history continues to repeat itself. And as long as we keep begging people to love us that don't love us, as long as we keep trying to depend on systems that don't serve us, we're gonna keep ending up in spaces like this where we are dying and our kids are not learning. And a digital divide. Today it's the digital divide. Yesterday it was a reading gap. What's it going to be tomorrow, right? And at some point, we got to stop being surprised at these problems and utilize and pull together the resources and the beautiful people that we got. Y'all are beautiful, man. You know what I'm saying? Like, lean on us and let's change some stuff. So that I learned that until we start forcing a new narrative, this cycle is going to continue.
I appreciate that, and we'll return to it later. I think your stories also are a reminder to us that even though we have institutions and, fierce members of Congress like the chairwoman and, we're still it's 21st century and we're still doing a lot of our own empowering, right? I mean, it's one thing to bridge the gap. It's another if the resources are there, but you still can't access them. And so we need to dig in deeper into, what are the root causes and why is it that the same people who in many ways were challenged by opportunity are the same ones that are still making that sacrifice to extend that opportunity to others. So how do we make this a collective responsibility on part of people, on part of those who have power, right? So we'll come back to that narrative. I want to shift gears to Felicia Hatcher, co-founder and executive director of Code Fever Black Tech Week. If you don't know her, you're gonna know her now. She's somebody who's on the move doing great things. We've had her and Dr. Wilson with us at the annual legislative conference. And it's important that you all also know the names of these people because they're resources for you. They're making time to empower, the community while they're empowering themselves. Mission to rid communities across the globe of innovation deserts by working with community leaders and government officials to create inclusive and diverse tech startup ecosystems. As an author and co-founder of the Tribe Co-work and Urban Innovation Lab, Code Fever, and Black Tech Week. As a result of her work, Miami has become one of the most authentically diverse startup ecosystems in the entire country, helping minority-led startup founders access opportunities and capital pathways through their venture capital VCs in residence program, exposing over 3,000 plus students and parents to tech skills training for youth and young adults in the Chan Zuckerberg Initiative, Ford, and others, as well as annual week-long emerging technology conference called Black Tech Week. She creates a magnetic force for attracting talent, resources, and opportunities for minority communities to thrive within the innovation economy. So let's talk to her, who is at the cusp of doing this work every day. Felicia.
Thank you so much for the invitation, and thank you so much to Congresswoman Johnson and Congressman Butterfield for your remarks kicking this off. We're in a really interesting time right now, right? Like one, just from a mental health standpoint of where we are right now in a pandemic and people are losing their lives. And then we're also faced with, lack of opportunity and kind of educational regression that we also have to be able to address, right? And so for us, the work has been around ridding communities of innovation deserts, and doing that work over the past 6 years. We're in this interesting point where people had stopped talking about the need and access to hardware and was solely focused on skill, right? Both of those things need to happen at the same time. And what happened when COVID kind of hit us and schools were closing was that all of a sudden it came back to a digital divide hardware conversation, that we were assuming that kids and families had access to reliable Wi-Fi and computers and laptops to be able to do this work. And then all of a sudden it was thrown in our face like, no, they did not. And this is a problem that we swept under the rug for years with the assumption that progress was happening, and now we are here. So like, how do we solve this problem? And so for us with Code Fever, we were providing a laptop rental program loan program, just like for young people before our school district was. And that's problematic, right? I think the other thing that is interesting, and I know we'll dive deeper in this conversation, but phones were kind of this thing that school districts were telling young people not to use. And then all of a sudden, when they were now home, it became an educational tool that could give them a little bit of access, but they had been told that, no, you don't use this in the classroom. There's no utility to this as a part of like your educational process to help you be a little bit more resourceful. And as just a stopgap until we figure out what you can do to still be able to access the tools and the resources that you need to continue your education. So I think at minimum, we have to have that conversation of like, because we would face that with our program. Like we would tell young people to answer a question. raise your hand if you know what HTML is. And then no one would raise their hand. And it's just like, but you have a phone in your hand that at any time you could have quickly done a Google search and be able to provide that answer. And so that is the problem that we're having, even with minimal tools, right? Then we go to like, hey, they need a computer in order to be able to build something. And so we do need to be able to address that. And I think that comes with strengthening public and private partnerships, because we have organizations and companies that can be able to provide these things. And so now we're at this conversation where we need to be able to have that. I think the other part of the workforce part is what's happening with the CARES Act. Some people have been able to benefit, some have not. And so either the lack of information or truly working with our community partners to disseminate this information is important, right? Like Dr. Fallon talks about the churches. I've not seen churches be enough of the conversation of laptop rental programs, or, Comcast, AT&T, Verizon all have these internet programs that are providing low income, either low cost or no cost internet access. And I very rarely see them partner with churches that have their feet to the ground, right? Nonprofit organizations that have their feet to the ground that can be able to get this into the hands of people, and from a logistics standpoint, make it much easier to provide access. And so we have things that are much more accessible tools that are natural to how we live and show up and how we do business that we are not using, that can help in the interim of figuring out what this larger problem is. And so we need to be able to address that. And then I think lastly, from a job standpoint, a lot of companies, a lot of technology companies that provide opportunities are now going remote permanently. So what does that mean for us in our communities as we're talking about technology skills and job opportunities? And so one, there are big disparity issues that we have to face, but then this also presents a really interesting opportunity and some hope that we cannot lose sight of having that conversation as well, because we have some brilliant Black people that are solving some really brilliant problems for us. There's a sister, I think she's in North Carolina, that is on the front lines of her company, actually creating solutions for COVID, right? Like we have to be able to also talk and celebrate her and companies that are doing these things on the front line, so that we can still have hope in this, because we need to be able to have hope to continue to innovate. But from a remote job standpoint, this presents a huge opportunity for us that are getting the tech skills, that are disconnected from Silicon Valley or any of the tech companies, to now be able to say, hey, I can live in my city, no matter where it is. I can still work here. I can gain a higher salary. I don't have to leave. I can contribute. But our programs, as we're thinking about opportunities for companies to get money, we also have to think around from a workforce standpoint and equip us with skills and opportunities and access to apply for remote job opportunities, because the networking is different. Let's be honest about that. But the opportunity can be greater and transformational for our communities. But we have to be thinking, as we're thinking about one thing, we have to simultaneously be thinking about what the future of this actually means for us.
Very well put. I mean, you remind us too of the importance of thinking long-term, but also just practical solutions, right? So, when we started these brain trusts, we were talking about Fair Count, Stacey Abrams' organization that's been working hard to ensure turnout for our communities. As you all know, the census deadline has been extended to October 31st. And in addition to all this data mapping we've been working on with them, they've actually allocated their funding to set up internet access to communities wherever they are, right? If they're in home, at the restaurant, down the street, wherever that is that people are to help fill out the census. That's it sounds intuitive. It is intuitive, but at the same time, sometimes we overthink things. I mean, empowering anybody, is a plus, right? But just making sure that institutions that are working like you are thinking in those ways, like what can I do practically now? Because to be honest, as Dr. Cole said, we talk about Black people, honestly, a lot of the folks we're talking about are not even tuning into this conversation because they don't have the access to do that. So, how do we bridge that gap? So I want to turn it now to Dr. Fallon Wilson, founder of the National Black Tech Ecosystem Builder Association. She has done incredible work as a Black tech activist in cities across the US by helping them address the intersecting tech disparities found within education tech pipelines, tech policies, tech companies and tech startups. She is the former CEO of Black in Tech Nashville and the former research director of Black Tech Mecca. She is the member of the Federal Communications Advisory Committee on Diversity and Digital Empowerment. And she has, you may have seen her at the 2019 TEDx speaker when she gave a talk called Stop Ignoring Black Women and Hear of Our Tech Prophecies. She represents the state of Tennessee, but she's been all over the country doing this work. She's the 2017 recipient of the ISTE Digital Equity Award. Her research is on first-generation Black college students and their alternative tech pathways and tech ecosystems, and how her research has garnered notable attention from Kapoor Center for Social Impact and Kauffman Foundation. So without further ado, and let me just say she is a graduate of Spelman College and got her PhD from the University of Chicago. And so I want to turn it over to her for her remarks.
First, thank you, Representative Johnson and Representative Butterfield, for your amazing work you do to ensure that our communities have access. Thank you, Nina, for just always being an advocate for equity. I have an interesting vantage point on all of this, because over the last 5 or 6 years, I've been able to talk about technology and policy in different arenas. I started working at American Baptist College, which is a small HBCU here in Nashville, Tennessee, and helping them think through what does it mean to re-engineer African-American communities and HBCUs for this new tech moment. And how do you do it if you're not necessarily a science-based HBCU? So started having conversations, started learning about all the trends and the moves, and I realized that it was such a necessity for us to think about our HBCUs. And then from there, I co-founded Black in Tech Nashville, because I realized that HBCUs was only one portion of the challenge here, and helping them think through the complexities on how to be marketable and compete with getting their students into tech companies and those things, and realized that there was a city issue too. Oh my goodness, our communities don't have access, right? And what is the city doing about it? And how can we make sure that our city leaders and our municipalities are really thinking creatively about how to ensure high quality, I say high quality internet, not just low cost internet, and how do you do that? And then I had the opportunity to work with national organizations like Black Tech Week and Felicia's organization and Black Tech Mecca, and then have all these conversations around what does it mean to build a thriving Black startup ecosystem? What types of capital formations and conversations and alternative pathways to capital should we have? And then, because I am a church girl by profession, I work a lot with churches, right? And having us to think through conversations about how do you re-engineer churches for this new tech moment. Of course, COVID has accelerated that conversation that I have now with many of our connectional ministries, but it's extremely important. I start by laying all of that out because I think the issue for me is not a resource issue. It's not a computer issue. It's not a broadband issue. Why do you say that, Dr. Wilson? Because we have those things. We have Comcast, we have Charter, we have AT&T, and we have dark fiber nets in our municipalities, right? And we have tech companies like Dell and others who create computers. So we have an abundance of resource. But the challenge is we're not aligned. We're not aligned or organized enough to make sure that those companies who are creating these fiber networks and those who are creating these hardwares are making them accessible for communities. And so I'm really excited about my new work of founding the National Black Tech Ecosystem Builder Association, because that is the work we are committed to. How do you align churches? How do you align K through 12 that serve predominantly African-American children in STEM and STEAM conversations? How do you align amazing organizations that Felicia works with as it relates to Black tech startups? How do you align conversations with our traditional technology organizations like NSBE or Blacks in Tech? How do you get everybody within cities talking the same conversation, aligning around resources, and then demanding that cities really begin thinking critically about how to ensure equity in their city? Because for me, once again, it's not a resource issue. And the second thing I would say about this entire conversation, the reason why we have to think about ecosystem and think about attacking the entire ecosystem is because if you look over the last 20 years of the digital divide, beginning with some of the conversation about rural and broadband, beginning with Clinton, going all the way up to conversations now about Connect Home under Obama, we have known consistently about that there's been an issue of access, right? But we have only episodically addressed each issue, right? First it was broadband, they're not getting connected. And then it's like, oh, you tech companies, you're not hiring. And so we spent the last 5 years, right? Thank you, Congress, thank you, Tech 2020, for holding, you know, Amazon and Facebook's accountable, right? And so we episodically attack segments depending on what epoch of time we're in. And what it has left us with is a type of fatigue, because we assume that if we do one by one, then eventually we'll lead to this grand ecosystem of inclusion for all people. But it doesn't happen that way. And the reason why it doesn't happen that way is because Black people are at the intersection of so many types of disparities that the only way that you attack it, and this is revolutionary, is with a social movement. Yes, I'm saying it here, CBC, you gotta have a social movement. You gotta have people at every part of our community, our faith communities, our HBCUs, our new Black tech data for Black lives, and yes, she's doing amazing work. You gotta have everybody talking the same conversation and saying that we will not go into an artificial intelligent age with our community not being there. And so my overall conversation is gonna be attack the ecosystem, build a social movement, and then that's how you get equity.
Thank you, very powerful. And I, you know, again, your remarks are telling us we really need to change, you know, the narrative. We have so many questions coming in, you know, Andrea Hankins sort of asking, how do we change this narrative? And I think, you know, you're doing that, right? We have resources. Let's talk about what those look like and how we can hold them accountable while we also talk about where the existing gaps are. So let's turn it into a conversation here. I want to go back to the chairwoman who has spent, you know, several decades of her life fighting for educational opportunity. Can you share with us, Chairwoman, just in your experience on the Hill in terms of public policies to mitigate this gap? You've done a lot of work in supporting STEM education, STEAM education at HBCUs and other colleges and universities. How have you seen things get better over the years? I mean, what have been the improvements over the years in terms of addressing this issue?
There have been some improvement, but not nearly enough. We still must recognize that our HBCUs are still the institutions that attract the majority of us, and they're still the ones that are left out the majority of the time. So what we've tried to do over the years is try to level the playing field so they can be eligible for many of the grants and research dollars that go out as government money. The peer review has been good and bad, but we've tried to improve that. We've tried to get the messages to our institutions that they must be in the game. They've got to be a part of all of this. When we look at our greatest young and researchers right now, they have come from historically Black colleges. That is a challenge we must always support. And historically, every piece of legislation that I have passed from that committee has always included something for the historically Black colleges. We cannot forget that they still are very basic institutions for the kids, the young people that need that higher education the most. Recently, I focused a lot on community colleges as well because of the skills that are needed now in the workplace. And we have that imagination. We do have those skills, and we had the opportunity to put those thoughts and dreams into action. And so we've got to embrace the young people who are not necessarily ready for college, but they can go to community college and get those skills that they need. We are in grave need, for example, of plumbers, of welders, of computer technologists, in all levels, coding, everything, and everything is gone computer. So we've got to emphasize that even if they cannot get a loan to go to a four-year institution. As a matter of fact, sometimes I question whether it's worth getting a loan to go to a 4-year institution, get a degree where there's no opportunity when you complete that degree. We've got to focus on skills and encourage our young people to utilize what they have naturally. It takes skill to grow up in this country Black. You've got to use the imagination. We have been the researchers, we've been the inventors, we've not always gotten the credit, but we have been the ones to do the invention because we had to be inventive and innovative in order to make it in this society. We ought to be the main people now with the opportunity to expand these skills. And we've got to make that happen. It is so frustrating to think that we talk about rural internet, and certainly it's needed, but rural is where we are. Rural is where we're concentrated. Even in a big city like I live and I represent in Dallas, it is one of the most innovative cities in the country and one of the most technological cities. But we still have those deserts right here in that same city. Remember, the chip was developed right here. And so we now are looking at artificial intelligence, that much of it was developed by those minds that were looking for ways to make it in the society. We've got to make a way to make sure that these minds have an opportunity to be expanded. And we got to use our community colleges as well as our 4-year institutions. And I'm discouraging young people from getting a lot of heavy loans to take political science or sociology. I want them in those STEM courses so it stimulates the thinking that's already there. It stimulates that imagination and that ingenuity that comes naturally with surviving as a Black person in this nation. We've got to make sure that we continue to encourage those innate abilities and expand upon them, give them the opportunity. A light bulb wouldn't stay on if it hadn't been for a Black mind that came along and made sure that the light could stay on. And I can think of so many things over the years that this race of people has had to be innovative because they didn't have much more to go on through style, through living conditions, all of that. We are not going backwards in these talents. We are going forward with the opportunities. We've got to make those opportunities and make sure that young people understand where we're coming from. We recognize that many of our young urban kids have been born to kids. And so we've got to make sure that we innovate and include that entire family to make sure that families understand where we're going now. Just having a bachelor's degree in sociology or political science might not be quite enough without those other skills. We've got to include those computers, and we've got to include that small computer that we are now calling a phone, a smartphone. They've got to have these tools. We've got to make sure that they have the tools, and it's possible because we buy everything else that's on the market. And we must make those tools affordable because many times the most creative thinkers are from the poorest families.
Thank you. No, wow, that's a lot of wisdom. Thank you for sharing. I mean, one of the ways you have been doing that, and you know, Dr. Michael Huff joined us asking a question. He's talking about how a lot of federal resources are available. And some of the work you've been doing, Chairwoman, is really on accountability, like making sure we even collect the data to make sure who are the recipients of these resources that we do have. Because there are just levels, there are layers to this, and so we appreciate you for your leadership. I want to turn it back to our panel. You know, in many ways, we can contextualize this conversation under like the 3 E's, sort of, you know, empowerment, education, and economic opportunity, right? You know, we can have so many different conversations about what it looks like to bridge this gap. I want to turn to you all because in the past, you know, few weeks, we've seen and I appreciate the way, Felicia, you're sort of turning the narrative around here, is that the same ways that teachers have instructed students not to use, you know, phones or access to the internet on their little gadget in the classroom might be the only way they can connect to educational opportunity, right? And so when we talk about what a virtual learning opportunity looks like, moving forward in this COVID-19 era, a lot of people don't realize just how challenging that is for even current communities to be able to continue their education right now. We've heard stories of people going into their cars and setting up shop near broadband, areas where there's access to free internet. I mean, it's totally not the ideal environment to work in. How do we get a better grasp of how detrimental the current environment is in highlighting these disparities, and is there anything we can do, now to try to address it better? Maybe Felicia, if you want to take that question, and we'll go to Dr. Cole and Dr. Wilson.
I can go after Miss Felicia if she wanted to go first, since you called on her.
Yeah, so I think there's a lot that can be done right now, right? I pause because I'm also thinking about like safety, right? Which is kind of the utmost important of our focus right now, because our community is suffering so much from COVID and everything that happens as a result of that, right? And so I think some of the easiest things is, one, I'm going to lean back to, it's a mindset thing of what is actually possible within our communities. This kind of innovation and Black communities are very rarely terms that are used in the same sentence. And that's unfortunate, because we aren't thinking bigger about what the possibilities are. We oftentimes don't see the opportunities or the resources that exist. And so that's one part of it. Two, I think we're going to see a shift. And I've been having conversations with some foundations and some organizations that are actually committed to education and what that means for communities and families. And they are not thinking about it right now. They're just like, we're kind of waiting and seeing what's going to happen in the fall, if school is going to, but I'm like, that's a problem. We have to be thinking about the solutions right now. We have to be leaning on resources that currently exist, that people that are solving these problems on a small scale, that can be piloted and tested in the summertime to be ready for what's happening in the fall. I think too often we are only focused on one problem and not simultaneously thinking on like, what are all the solutions? What can we be testing? Again, like I'm a silver lining person, although this is a really crappy time that we're in to be thinking about silver lining. But e-learning provides us an opportunity to be able to gather some really important data about how our kids learn, how they're showing up, how they're not showing up, what is actually needed in real time, and then also be able to deploy interventions much faster. And I think we need to be looking at what that actually means. Most of the conversations that I've been having or just been like, well, we don't want kids on the computers for 8 hours. I understand that, but that is not an excuse for creating opportunity, innovation labs, innovation funds, like whatever you need to create in order to be able to test things out so that we are prepared for the future and not kind of like lagging behind and hoping and wishing that something is going to fall in our lap that is going to create better like access and equity for us. Like now is the time. We have too many brilliant people that can be solving these problems. And so just like Fallon said, like we have the resources, we have the people, there is a disconnect from all of these things coming together. And so at minimum, if we need to do an asset map within our given communities of what all the resources are, who can help, from corporations all the way down to the small mom and pop shop, and like whatever it needs to be, like we can do that right now so that we can start putting a plan together during the summertime to be fully prepared for the fall. If we're still asking ourselves this question in the fall, we have missed 3 months that we could be productive in this opportunity to kind of level us up as much as possible.
No, I think it's 3 different things. I think it's knowing our history. I think it's a self-respect, and I think it's action. And I'll be brief. I'm even going to time myself to make sure I don't take up too much time. But I think one, like we got to understand who we are and where we come from. Like we have a history that started long before slavery. Like we invented math. Like it's we didn't just arrive here. Like we invented math. And I think that oftentimes we talk about our history, we tend to talk about the beginning of slavery and the end of slavery, and not that period in between with all those generations that just had to kind of make do. But even in that time, we were always like making things work and making it happen. We had invisible institutions that ran through the church, which gave us the precipice to actually like fight for our freedom. I'm saying that stuff because the biggest period in which Black folks learned how to read was directly after slavery, when we didn't have any money, we didn't have any resource, and only 10% of our population knew how to read. And we took that and we built schools and we educated our people. I'm just saying, like, if we don't know these things, we can't be rooted in what the solutions are. And then that brings me to self-respect. So now that I know who I am and where I come from and what's in my blood and my veins, right? Like, we need to stop begging these systems and stop begging people to love us and start demanding the resources that we need so we can do what we need to do. And I think that that's one of the things, and I heard Dr. Wilson and folks have been saying some amazing things, and I love those systemic issues. And it also makes me wonder about what happens on Monday though, right? Like, those things take time and resources. Like, how are we being agentic and getting what we need, like, for tomorrow? Like, when we talk about the digital divide, you know, like, it's our young people run the internet. Black folks run the internet. Black Twitter runs the internet and makes and says who has jobs and who don't. TikTok, we run that stuff. People are making movies off of their phones, right? So I think, listen, if you look at our history, everything that we just go off and do our own thing, whether it's fashion, whether it's sports, whether it's shoes, whether it's music, we lead the world in it, and we're only 13% of this population here. But everything that we chase white folks on, education and finances, we lag severely behind. And somewhere along the way, we gotta learn how to break that way of thinking. So if we talking, I wanna have an agentic talk. I want to have a conversation where the next meeting is saying, look, I'm going to bring together the smartest people I know in this Black community, and some of those folks that don't got degrees, and some of them that do, and people that's farming, and people that's doing a whole bunch of stuff. And let's, like, really have a conversation and start to rethink these things. But until we shift our mindset and we stay in this, like, this aspect of where we keep asking these people to care about us more. I don't care if you care about me. I don't care if you like me. Let me just get what I need and I'll get out your way. And I'd be remiss, and we'd be remiss if we don't mention what's happening yesterday, and there's a city on fire and why that's happening, right? All this stuff is connected. And we just keep having the same conversations. How much stuff has to happen before we realize we're on our own? And once we realize we're on our own, like, what's it gonna take for us to jump into action and do the things that we need to do? So sorry if I took up too much time, but I just really wanted to address mindset and just kind of where I'm at, and also just the emotional place that I'm in, based off of, like, what we've seen.
What I would say, building off of Dr. Cole's comment and Felicia's comment, and Felicia talks a lot about the innovation economy. Man, you should hear her spiel on, we did Airbnb before there was Airbnb. I mean, so talking about the cultural creation and the innovative spirit of Black people, and of course, Representative Johnson talked about, we created the light. I mean, we have that. The issue has never been our intellect. It's Black people. It has never been our creative genius. It has never been our intelligence. It has always been the unequal redistribution of resource. And so for me, if I thought about this moment, locally, I work with Black in Tech Nashville, and we work with the Chamber. We work with the National Public Education Foundation. Well, maybe not anymore, but that's a bigger story there. We work with various institutions and organizations right this moment to try to figure out how do you ensure that Metro Nashville Public School students get a laptop with quality internet and be ready to use Schoology by day 1 of August. And let me tell you, trying to marshal a city to drive into the direction and care about the lived experiences of Black and brown children who make up 80% of our school district is an interesting place to be in. And what we have had to do was to, number one, on one level, you have community organizations who care about civic and voting and all the amazing things that we care about as a community. They're having to shift, not only talk about take the census, give out the COVID PPE, but now we need to talk about digital inclusion so that you can take the census. And so they're having to redirect the narrative, right? While organizations like mine that specifically focus on technology and ecosystem and equity, we're having to pull all the amazing people who have the most exciting things that they want to do and the ways that they want to go about getting computers to kids to say, wait, do not let urgency defeat strategic courage. right? Do not let this notion of, well, we got to do it, Fallon, override planning. What I want to say that what you can do is, if you're in a local organization, every city nowadays have a smart city plan. Most cities do, and some of them are better than others. Some really talk about human capital development and digital inclusion past this notion of broadband. And I think Austin probably would be leading that type of conversation. In Nashville, where I co-chaired our smart city plan, we talked in depth about inclusion and equity, right? And so it begins by first looking at your city, seeing if there are any plans on the book that talks about equity. Secondly, there are always amazing organizations from the NAACP, the Urban League, our legacy, yes, I'm gonna say it, our legacy institutions matter too. Yes, they're challenging to work with, but we can't get far without them, right? And so bringing them into the conversation and identifying African-American educators who care deeply about our children and think about what we're now doing in Nashville because of Athena, Dr. McKinney with the Women of Color for Education Equity is developing a co-op learning model, right? What does that look like? It looks like you figure out how to solve the PPE problem, right? Personal protection, but then you find a central educator who understands the standards of your school district and your state, and you develop weekly types of assignments that neighborhoods within communities can follow. And you create life science. Man, let me tell you, I am not the best cook. But COVID has made me a chef, okay? And so for me, thinking about how to think about life skills, and back in the day, I think it was called domestic economics in high school, cooperative economics. Y'all know what I'm talking about, where you had to learn to cook and clean in high school, right? I think it's a creative time to think about how other school systems have thought about experiential learning. So I'm all about online, but as someone who hates Zoom meetings, and I'm gonna be in Zoom meetings from 9 until 5 daily, because people think that you're at home and you're just supposed to be connected, it wears on me. And so trying to develop a hybrid model and working with educators who care about justice, you can get those type of learning models for communities. And then you can also talk with, once again, it's always gonna end for policy for me. My mentor always says policy and law makes people's good intentions conform. Yes, there's some challenges there, right? But you can't lynch me without me being able to, get the FBI. I mean, there's just certain things you just cannot do without a public outcry and a public accounting for it. And I would say the same thing about this digital process. What I think the challenge is, and I'm gonna say this, and people in Nashville, they know me. They know Fallon. I would say we're so urgent to solve this problem, and the problem is of great urgency. However, Black folks have lived through some of the most chaotic. We have lived with so much non-resource that when I have non-people of color tell me, Dr. Wilson, I don't want to develop a plan for the fall. I don't want to think about education and equity. I just want to focus on devices, and I only want to focus on connectivity, because those are the things that are, it lets me know that you don't have a creative imagination to ever think about my liberation as a Black person, because you don't understand that if you put a computer in a home, I'll give an example. One of my mentees, and I got a lot of mentees, y'all. I don't have children, but I have mentees. And they say, yeah, we sold it, we pawned it. I said, you pawned the laptop the school district gave? Yes, ma'am, we did. I said, why did you pawn it? Because I'm not gonna have a summer job because I have to stay in. Did you hear all of that density there? So as school districts and as good meaning non-people of color go about securing devices and not talking to the people that they're securing the devices for, and not developing a plan for the people that they're securing the devices and the connectivity for, Black and brown people are making decisions about those devices. Or another example, Comcast gave me Internet Essentials, Miss Fallon, but it's been in the corner for the last 5 weeks because I don't know how to connect it to the wall or to the cable. I mean, you have to say to yourself, and so that brings me back to the table of forcing the city and our private companies and our telecommunication companies and government to say, you just can't just get devices and throw them out and not think about the long-term use of them. And for me, if you do it and create a plan around equity and disparity, not only do you get to solve the digital inclusion process and hybrid learning that we will have to have in the fall, but you can help with telehealth and COVID tracking that is not about surveillance, but about a community building moment. You get to identify food insecure neighborhoods so that my kids don't have to sell their laptops you gave them to feed themselves. It is, I'm going to end on this. I cannot, this urgency as a Black woman who's one generation from poverty herself, who lives and have to think about Black bodies being abused, if I am not jumping to throw devices at children and communities, and you are, then we need to have a discussion about how you really think about my liberation.
I don't even know where to go with that because there's so much.
But I mean,
It's
I
real.
want to push on that though. I mean, they don't care. I mean, whether you care about my liberation or not, right? Like whether you respect me or not, like
Right.
This is what I'm saying, right? Like these folks, it ain't their job. They don't care. You know what I'm saying? Let's just assume that they don't care. Let's just assume that we on our own. And like, let's look at who we are that's in this group. Like we are, for the most part, doing well. Like we might be like one generation or less than a generation, like removed from poverty or whatever. But there are people right now that's out here that's like, look, I'm appreciating this conversation, right? But like, what can I do right now? Like, what's going on? And I think that one of the things we got to acknowledge is, look, we're talking about the divide that's happening right now and what kids are missing. Like, we got to even acknowledge that even when everything was working, quote unquote, right? Like, less than 4 out of 10 Black kids can read on grade level in the richest state, in the richest country in the history of the world. Like, I mean, I'm just saying, like, at some point, and I'm not trying to be like the revolutionary and tell us to go out and arm and do all this stuff. But what I'm saying is, man, like, I'm not begging these people for a damn thing else. I'm not doing it. I think we smart enough. I think there's people in these comments. I think that like we have always figured things out. I think between our mosque, our churches, our moms and dads, our stores, like all this stuff. Listen, I purchased a house and I love my degrees, but them degrees didn't mean a damn thing when a pipe busted in my house and my basement flooded. You know what I'm saying? Like there are skills that we're not teaching our people anymore. And I think that we got to get back to that stuff. You know what I'm saying? And sorry, I know that might not be the most coherent. I didn't mean to just jump in.
No,
But I think you're absolutely right. Like we have a time to restructure how we do everything, right? Like we don't have to lean on those people anymore, and we can use technology to do that. And so there is an access issue, and I'm not circumventing, like I'm not going around that because that is a real issue. But we also know, like when outside was open, our schools were failing us, and we were still putting our kids in them every single day and expecting a different kind of outcome.
Right.
yeah.
Like my kids can now learn from Dr. Wilson 2 days a week if we wanted to, right? Or Dr. Cole 2 days a week. And I can completely, like, I now have control of their educational environment where I did not have before. And I was constantly putting my kids into a failing system, right? My 6-year-old daughter is still traumatized about like her experience with her kindergarten teacher. I can now do something about that. We can do something about that, right? Like I have friends who are like, I want to start a Black Saturday school. You can do that now, right? We have the tools to be able to do that. And so, yes, there's a lot of BS going on in the world, but we also have to approach this from a position of power because you know what? We do index high on use of social media, but we can incorporate that into how we learn and how we build and how we grow. We started 3 like online schools as soon as COVID hit. Why? Because from a financial standpoint, we wanted our people to put their oxygen mask on. They were being screwed by the CARES Act. Banks were not, responding to them. They were not giving them the resources. Well, you know what? We're going to launch a side hustle academy. We're going to show you how to put an oxygen mask on. If you are making masks, let's show you how to market this and sell this. If you are, delivering food or want to deliver food because you realize that you can make, charge people $40 an hour, and that is going to be the thing that gives you a little bit of money to just kind of survive and weather the storm. Like we can have different conversations given the resources that we all have to like economically impact our people. Like we don't have to wait for people. We just create the things. And I think now more than ever before, the barrier to entry to create these things by using technology is different. Like I had that same conversation with my friend that wanted to do the Black Saturdays. They've been talking about it for 3 years. I'm like, let's do it. A quick page, get on Zoom. There are parents that are now realizing that what we thought was going to happen for us is not happening, and that we have to put it within our own hands, and we should be thinking about that. We launched a STEM at Home program, right? Like, so our kids, they're tired of like, whatever they're learning or not learning on throughout their traditional classroom. We wanted to put Black instructors in front of them. We wanted to put Black people that were doing amazing things and put in front of them from a career standpoint and talk about what the opportunities are. Like, these are things that we do, and if technology is an issue, as far as people streaming or doing video conferencing, we can get on a phone conference call line and still be able to reach our people with the tools that we have. Like, we don't have to use technology for technology's sake. We can go analog, we can go, like, we can do all these different things. So like, we also have to have like, and Mina, I love you for inviting me on this, but I want us to, like, whoever you decide, another time, like Cole said, and like, let's do this is resources. These
resources, right?
And I'll help.
I wanna, no, thank you, because I wanna introduce Congresswoman who's joined us here before she goes back to the floor. And there are a lot of resources coming in. So we're gonna have a conversation and put up something on our website to let people know, because there are resources. So we're talking about accountability, but we're gonna provide those resources for you. I wanna turn it over to Congresswoman Barbara Lee, who is on the powerful Appropriations Committee, stalwart, again, supporter, fierce leader, running the CBC Diversity Task Force and CBC Tech 2020. She has been in office over 20 years and is currently the only African-American woman serving in Democratic leadership as the co-chair of the Policy and Steering Committee. So Congresswoman Barbara, thank you for your leadership and what you do. We're having a very involved conversation here about access, opportunity, economic empowerment as it results to bridging this digital divide. Please share with us sort of your perspective on the policy side of where we need to be in terms of the Black community and access to tech opportunities.
Thank you so much. Is this Mina speaking?
Yes, it is.
Hi. Well, I'm really proud of you. I just have to always mention that you served in my office as a CBC fellow.
Thank you.
I love you, job. So, yeah, you've done amazing work and continue to lead and on so many fronts. And let me take a moment to thank all of you. And I don't know if my colleagues are still on, but Congresswoman Bernice Johnson, who I remember early on, we visited Texas Instruments in her district. And she was so far ahead of the rest of the country, really, as it relates to access to technology for young people. And I'll always remember that visit because that helped me focus again more on Silicon Valley, which is right next door to my district. And also to Congressman G.K. Butterfield, who really has been a champion on so many issues. And we've been working as co-chairs of Tech 2020 since he was chairing the Black Caucus. And hopefully you all know about Tech 2020. We've made some progress, not enough. We've got to work harder even, because these tech companies and the tech sector itself has a culture that's built in, that's very biased, and they talk about doing unconscious bias training and work. Well, that's all about racism. And so we have to really continue to fight on that front. I'm glad that you're having this deep conversation about inequities, because I've even heard Reverend Jackson. We talked about this as it relates to the tech sector, and we're not talking just about diversity. We're talking about racial equity, and we're talking about the empowerment of African Americans in every aspect of the society, not just diversity. Also, let me just say that during this pandemic, of course, the African-American community is in a pandemic upon a pandemic. And I don't want to see us return to normal at all. And I think what you were talking about in terms of using this moment to begin to restructure everything is extremely important, because God knows we can't go back to where we were. So many African-Americans are disproportionately living below the poverty line. I chair the Poverty Task Force. And we're seeing more and more fall below the poverty line. So many people before COVID, so many of our people have been living on the edge. They're the workforce of essential workers, African Americans, lower wage workers who've been forced to go back to work without their protective gear. Who are they? They're our people. And so we can't allow this to happen. And so the brother was speaking before, said he wasn't a revolutionary. Well, I am. And I was around when the police were intimidating and killing our people in the 60s and 70s, working as a community worker with the Black Panther Party. And so I'm not advocating that we go out and do anything violent, because I'm a person of peace and nonviolence, but I say we have to look at restructuring and repairing the damage and making sure that we move forward out of this in a better place, which means we have to, yes, dismantle some of the very oppressive policies. And we have to become even more politically active. When President Obama was in office, I worked with him in introducing the Computer Science for All Act. That would provide $250 million in new grants. And you were talking about broadband earlier. As I was driving, I really listened, and it was a wonderful conversation. Well, this is a bill that I introduced that we still haven't passed, to provide $250 million in new grants to provide computer science education for kids in pre-K to 12 with regard to low-income kids and African-American and children of color. Well, of course, we haven't gotten the bill passed, but every year in appropriations, I've worked to increase the amount of funding that we put into a computer science account. And we need to know that those grants come out. I've been asking our members to make sure that their constituents know that we have some funding with the Department of Ed. They are grants. They can go to nonprofits, or they can go to school districts. And the numbers are still low, but they doubled from 2016 because of the introduction of this new program, with regard to computer science principles and the opportunities for students of color and for girls. And so some of the funding as an appropriator, we're getting to $250 million. That's still not enough, but we're probably over 150 now. But, you know, we have to really understand that this digital divide and lack of broadband and lack of technology that now everyone is beginning to see and realize is that this is part of the last 400 years. It's part of the divide that has been with us since our coming to America, enslaved. And so we can't forget the history and how we got here as we fight on all fronts to make sure that not only our healthcare disparities are addressed and dealt with, but that our access to technology, to broadband, to technical skills, to equity, equality of education, we have to fight on all those fronts, because otherwise this pandemic will once again set us back so far another generation until it's going to take another 400 years to dig ourselves out. And so, yes, we need to take this time to regroup, to restructure, and to know that we have a heck of a lot of skills, we have a heck of a lot of resources in our own community to lead the way, and that we're not going to go back to where we were before this pandemic hit us. And so we have to, yes, deal with the emergency right now in terms of making sure our students have access to computers. In my district, the Golden State of California, 29, 30% of Black children live below the poverty line, and we have to raise private money just so they could study, engage in long distance studying. And that's in the East Bay, Oakland, Berkeley, you know. And so this is everywhere. And it's really an important point that we have to always remember, and that's the historical context of equity and racial justice. So thank you all again very much. Really hope everyone is healthy and safe, and I want to take a moment to also offer my condolences to those who've lost loved ones, who've lost family members and friends as a result of this terrible, horrific pandemic. And also thank our frontline workers who are keeping this country open and healthy and safe, sometimes working, oftentimes minimum wage workers without what they need to protect themselves, and majority of whom are Black and brown. And so I just have to thank all of them at this moment, and just ask the foundation to make sure we always lift them up and keep those who've lost loved ones in our prayers, and do everything we can do to help this country recover and to help our community recover, but not go back to where we were before the pandemic started. Thank you again.
Thank you, Congresswoman. We appreciate your words. It's right on the money, honestly, and for our CBC members who have really been doing this work to bridge the gap on so many fronts. it's not new to us, but what she's saying about this new normal, we need to look at it as an opportunity. We're getting a lot of questions and comments coming in, and I want to return to the discussion on around sort of accountability mechanisms, but also to give you all a chance to really share your story about how you started to build your businesses and organizations, because sometimes we, as Nicole said, you know, our history shows that there is a blueprint for innovation and creativity. It's pretty much in our DNA, but we often, you know, see the sort of hills instead of seeing sort of the valleys to get there. And so I want to have that conversation. We have someone, Sandra Hollins here. She's saying, as we are discussing the impact of COVID-19 on the African American community, please let's remember that we have states that have a low African American population whose needs are left out of the conversation. I am the only Black state legislator in Utah and often face barriers to finding resources and funding to address our community. How do we reach, and going back to Congressman Butterfield's comments, what I can tell you now is there are these resources, a lot of them don't know, so we're gonna be one of those entities that centralizes all of these resources, because even in our chat feed, we are getting tons of feedback on folks who are actually doing this work, like the panelists on this call, like our member of Congress on this call. But how do we have a conversation about the sort of invisible within visible communities in the rural spaces? What have been the stories that you all have heard about their particularly needs? Are they any more unique or similar to sort of other communities in urban spaces?
Part of the work that I'll be doing in the fall is really looking at a sample of cities that are not typically majority or typical urban cities. So looking at cities where you have large majorities, but not necessarily the same level of attributes that urban majority Black cities have. So looking like at Jennings, Missouri, which is outside of St. Louis and does not necessarily have all of the features that we would list as a thriving Black tech ecosystem, right? They don't have a Black tech organization like NSB or Blackson Tech. They do not have, and the majority of the African Americans within that city don't have broadband or access. I think for me, the true like strength of what we do is based on if we cannot help cities that are Black cities that are like that, or cities in Mississippi in particular. The Jackson mayor is doing amazing work. If we can't figure out how to really start the innovation economy, and I know Felicia probably can talk a lot in that way, in this world, in this space, then we are really losing the opportunity. I think that yes, the rural communities are definitely in dire need, and I think we can easily see that data. But I also would say the way that we think about connectivity and how we measure it is could be a little clouded too in urban cities, y'all. When you really look at it, African Americans are not doing well as it relates to access and connectivity, also in urban environments. I always want to keep that as a conversation point so that resources are not just always pushed over there. I agree with Dr. Cole and Felicia. We got in our community, we got innovators, we can do it. But I will always say that I pay tax dollars and we take the census, right? So that we can redistribute resources based on where we live and who we are, that we should make public entities and governments accountable to how they use those resources for us. And so that there are some best practices out there. Here we're trying to build in Nashville a digital inclusion commission. We are not a majority Black city, okay? Memphis is though, and that's a whole nother discussion we can have about the municipality there and the amount of work that they're doing around digital inclusion. But in Nashville, we do not. And so having a Black organization like mine say, we need a digital inclusion commission at the metro government so that irrespective of what mayor or what superintendent or what elected official is in office, this commission is dedicated to addressing issues of equity for people of color and poor people in Nashville, right? And I think being able to create that type of framework, as we saw the immediate conversation around like devices for students over the summer, you have to do both. Going back to my larger point, you got to have the revolutionary, and everyone knows Fallon is pro-Black, right? But you also have to have the conversations about policy, because I pay tax dollars as a woman who owns her own business. Let's be clear, Fallon pays taxes, okay? And so I want those tax dollars to go toward my community, and being able to create a Black tech ecosystem in a city, whether it's a majority city like Memphis, Detroit, Cleveland, Miami Gardens, or whether it's a rural space or a less densely populated but yet majority Black city like Jennings, or like Nebraska. What is the largest population in Nebraska? I can't think. I think the same level of discussion around access will be the same. And I think being able to create, if not city models where you have majority African Americans within a city, but regional models where we're sharing both resources and best practices. There's no reason why St. Louis and Missouri and Jennings, Missouri cannot share a type of ecosystem mapping that would create a regional Black tech ecosystem that's based on data, resource, and funding. And so I just don't like pushing the urban against the rural, because they both are in need. And I think the way that we think about operationalizing what the need looks like in broadband and the data, y'all know data can be sliced, diced, and I love my ISPs, but being able to get a good measure on what that looks like in cities and also comparing that to rural Black communities, I think is a research project, Nina, that we can explore to talk about access and connectivity.
Thank you. I know we have 10 minutes left, and I want to encourage our viewers to continue to drop your resources. If you are in this space doing work, we're going to compile all of this information, and so it can be accessible to the larger public. I want to bring it back and have everyone sort of leave with their final words, and we'll end with Chairwoman Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson. I would be remiss if we didn't talk about the empowerment piece. I know we don't have as much time to get into that, but as we've witnessed the past couple weeks, it is our people that have been documenting the murders of Ahmaud Arbery and George Floyd in Minnesota through the use of technology, right? Holding our law enforcement accountable when they should be protecting us. That is a tool of empowerment. It's a necessity right now. And when you look at it, I mean, I just put a post today on my Facebook because we're all sickened and frustrated at the continuation of police brutality. If you are not the one being beat up or killed by the cops, you might be the one with the camera, videotaping it, or you might be the next one who, praying for your family and friends for it not to happen. So this is very real, and the ways in which our community utilizes whatever resources we have to shine a light on making sure our elected officials, our policymakers, our law enforcement, the powers that be are accountable, are done through a cell phone, right? And we cannot dismiss the power of technology and the ways in which we choose to use them. I think we have seen the emergence of diversity and inclusion over the past decade. We are continuing to define what that means. Diversity is not simply about putting a Black kid in a classroom, or empowerment needs to be broken down in several layers. And there are ways to, there's corporate responsibility. There are opportunities for us to narrate that conversation in ways that really do empower technology. You heard Dr. Wilson list a ton of companies and supporters who do this work. Let's give them examples of what it is we need in this critical time. So I want to lift up our panelists. You all viewing can find more information on our website, www.cbcfinc.org. Come back to sure we have their information and the work they do accessible, so you can have blueprints of solutions that are working, industries and organizations and people who are doing this work. And with that, I want to ask, Dr. Cole, Felicia, Dr. Wilson, and Chairwoman, if you can,
yeah, I'll go very quickly. Less than 2 minutes. I'm just very lucky to be Black. I'm very happy, and whatever you was born as, you should be proud of it. But I'm very, very happy about that fact. Do what you can. The CBCF can right now be a TV network tomorrow with what technology is. I co-founded A Black Hands with 3 other brothers. We don't always agree, but all we talk about is Black education. We reach about 70,000 people. CBCF can broadcast that out and get it to way more folks, right? You all can play history all day on your Facebook page if you wanted to. And then you asked about the business. I believe in the 9 to 5, 5 to 9 model. Listen, I lived in 4 shelters. I was homeless. I'm not one of those people that's gonna tell you to quit your job or do whatever. Your 9 to 5 is what pays your bills and make sure you have a roof over your head. But your 5 to 9 is when you invest in yourself. So whether you got hours at night or you got 15 minutes, every night I went home, I started on a napkin, I wrote down what I wanted to do, and then I would refine it. I would go to YouTube and teach myself and learn things. You got access to more information than Martin Luther King, Aristotle, or anybody that you think is smart. You got way more access to information than they did just on your phone. So that's what I would say, and that's what I would leave people with. I know folks are asking about the book. The book is called Beyond Grit and Resilience. We'll get that out, however.
Wait, say that again slowly for everybody.
I know, I was trying to go fast so we can get to everybody. Beyond Grit and Resilience, and I will give you the link and you can send it out on your Facebook page, Dr. Mina.
Sure.
Thank y'all for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for the work you do. Any last words, Felicia, Dr. Wilson, and then we'll go to the chairwoman.
Yeah, you know, it's been a heavy week for us, right? Like just as a people. And yesterday I was just like, you know, this is probably the first time where something so tragic has happened to us that we didn't have to then show up in the world the next day and pretend like this has not been a traumatic experience for us. Whether that's young people showing up in a classroom that is not taking, you know, holding some space to have a true conversation about what this has meant for them as a person, or the work environments that we walk into where everyone is kikiing and not realizing that someone tragically lost their life and what that affects for us as a people. And so, you know, take time, take grace in order to like whatever self-care you need, and then we got to fight, right? We have to hold people accountable. And so using technology to hold people accountable, let's do that. I think one of the most disturbing conversations I keep seeing happen online is people are shaming people for social media activism. And that's so problematic for me. You know, these things that are happening and whatever the result is happening or the steps that are moving forward would not have happened if we were not mobilizing online. And so the question should not be like, stop just like, you know, being an Instagram activist. Like, no, that is important. The question should be then what after that, what is the next step, right? And so toolboxes, toolkits, picking up the phone, voting, right? All the things that we need to do, we have to have the follow-up conversation and the follow-up steps, but we need to stop shame. Every time we use something to power up, there is shame that is then thrown at us to stop us from doing that thing, right? Black Twitter goes crazy and holds people accountable and makes people lose their jobs and their dogs. That is actual progress, right?
That's right.
It allows us to use whatever tools are available to hold people accountable, and then we plan the next steps. Let's stop shaming ourselves and each other for using tools. And so that's what just to kind of piggyback off of you, that's what I would want to have a conversation. Broadband is important, but broadband, then what, right? Like I also want to constantly be having those conversations simultaneously, and that action and that accountability and that progress so that we can move forward as a people.
Thank you. We have 3 minutes left, so I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Fallon and then the chairwoman.
Okay, I'll try to be very quick, but I'm sorry. There's very few times you get to tell Congress what they could be doing. And lovingly, of course, because y'all are doing such great work. Number one, we need to authorize the HEROES bill, because you can't talk about kids having computers if their families can't feed themselves. It doesn't work like that. So that bill needs to pass. I think we should think about what does it mean to have public Wi-Fi for free as a national utility. Yeah, our internet service providers would not like that, but I think it's something we should talk about. And a bill that I saw that's in committee is the Digital Equity Act. What I love about that bill in particular is that it talks about how giving block grants to cities to think about digital inclusion and smart city types of mechanisms and processes. And underneath that, you can slide in the amazing work that Representative Barbara Lee is working on computer science for all, which we do need and should be funded. And she is so tirelessly doing that work. And it makes me happy every time she talks about it. In addition to that, we should have a digital inclusion. Let me tell you, I got a list. We should have a digital inclusion fellowship that really works like AmeriCorps. It should be funded at the national level, sending Black genius into cities or shoring up Black genius in cities who are doing tech ecosystem building work.
Which includes the Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. We have fellowships, tech fellowships. We have 1 minute left, so.
Okay, and this is my last and probably my most profound point. I don't think that we can have an inclusive Black tech ecosystem locally or nationally without talking about our faith communities our churches and our mosques matter. I know when President Obama was president, we had the Faith-Based Neighborhood Partnership Office. We really should think about reactivating that, because one thing I can say about faith communities and the Black church in particular is that when AIDS hit our communities in the early 80s, it was Black faith organizations like Balm and Gilead, or those by Reverend Edward Sanders, who chairs some of our AIDS conversations it was them being able to take that large virus, that large issue, and make it into a public health issue using faith and metaphors from the Bible to talk about the complexities and why we as a community should take it on. I think we should use churches in that way to be able to operationalize this new space of what does it mean for digital inclusion to be a type of public health moment, right? And also, what does it mean to work with faith communities outside of HBCUs, where we have predominantly large groups of Black people congregating, both online and now offline, to talk about these issues.
Can we stay a little longer so our elder can take us out? Yeah, just to,
yes.
I can stay if I
want. So let me just, I want to again thank the Walton Family Foundation for supporting us with this conversation. As the chairwoman leads us out, I would like to ask us to put up the polling question for our viewers. If you could just stand by and fill this out so we understand that we're meeting your needs, and register with us for the next webinar, which is happening in 2 weeks at www.cbcfinc.org/webinar. You can go to our website and find that information. Again, thanks to the Walton Family Foundation, and I'd like to turn it to our chairwoman to please close us out.
Well, thank you very much. This has been fascinating, and believe it, we need all of this input. So I'm very, very pleased to hear what we need to be doing legislatively. We try hard, but we cannot do it without your helping us with the community. And also, as she mentioned, the churches, getting the information out. I'm delighted that this technology has brought us all closer together. When you mention about what happened in Minnesota, you can talk about it all you want to, but until somebody actually sees it, it doesn't always strike home. Those are the kinds of examples we need to make sure that all of us see and continue to educate. We've got to be counted so that we can justify the money. So make sure that the census is #1 priority for us. We have got to make sure that we have the statistics to prove of our needs. As much as we know what they are, we still have to prove it scientifically. I'm delighted to see all of our educated people that are willing to give of their time and help educate the rest of us. Thanks to all of you for what you do. We appreciate all of it. Send us the information, stay in touch. We're trying very hard to be responsive.
Thank you, Chairwoman Bernice Johnson, for your leadership. Thank you to our panelists and for their leadership, Dr. Charles Cole, Felicia Hatcher, and Dr. Fallon Wilson. Please join us in 2 weeks. Johnson & Johnson is sponsoring our next webinar, which will be on Black America, the Double Pandemic. You can join us and register at www.cbcfinc.org/webinar. This session has been recorded. We are going to compile all of the resources that have been shared and give you access to the wonderful work our panelists are doing. So thank you all for tuning in. Please join us in 2 weeks, and let's keep hope alive, stay safe and healthy, and taking it back to Dr. Cole's words, let us never forget our history, because our history was predicated on innovation and creativity and imagination when justice was never ours to claim it and move forward. And we will do that in every facet of our life, and we will continue to do that in the digital space. So thank you very much, and stay safe. Take care.
I was hoping they put that up.
Thank you, Michael and team, Congressional Black Caucus Foundation. We can close out Michael Grillo. Thank you. Thank you all too. We appreciate it.
It was very nice meeting you all as well.
Thank you,
I'd love to
guys.
get everybody's email address. I love y'all's points.
Yeah, you guys were fantastic. It's a lot to take in, and I agree. I think we just need to, there's so many resources. Even our fellowships, I mean, the people who know them, right, they apply for them, but there's so many in our community that don't know, right? So when we go to our partners, we say, you really want to help the DE space, you want to help the tech equity space, then invest in our people, allow them the opportunity to work on the Hill and become a leader. And, you know, CVC members have been great. Even, you know, Chairwoman, you're still with us. And, you know, if it weren't for you, we would have never been able to start our Voice Virtual Library project. So she actually reached out to Dell and said, hey, we need to capture the histories of CVC members. We need a digital legislative archive that can be used as an educational tool to teach K through 12 students about their history, about Black history. And if it weren't for her, we wouldn't have been able to start that in 2005. So, you know, there's so many examples of this. So we really appreciate, you know, all the work you all are doing. I believe we're still being recorded, but, you know, we can close out CVCF team.
And I mean it. I mean, I'm down to help. I mean, there are things that we've built. I can teach you all for free how to turn your Facebook page into, y'all can just be running YouTube history videos. And I mean, I think y'all can put out a call and, like, you know, compile a list of people and their skill sets. I mean, you all have that type of power. I really mean it, man. I'm really tired of, like, begging white folks for anything. I don't care if we're recording or not. Chairwoman Johnson, thank you so much for your space and for your time. And just for giving us that space to do it. But I'm down to help in any way. And for anybody that was on this call, feel free to reach out to me, like, you know, and
Please be in touch.
And we're closing out now. Thank you all.
Thank you. Thank you, Nina.